All right, we're going to get started. Welcome everybody to the Missouri Historical Society's Young Friends event, History on Tap, for this month. In the next couple months, we will start having real events in person. So we've got some exciting things coming up for the fall, including a walking tour in October of ghost buildings, which is an architectural history tour that will be of Soulard in the fall. So if you're new to knowing what the Young Friends are, it's a group of young adults, but also professionals at, we introduce young adults and professionals to MHS and, helping to kind of foster interest in St. Louis's past and the region's past and create ways to get involved in being part of that history preservation and protection. So we invite everybody to join. If you all you have to do is become an MHS member. It's a free add-on to your membership, and it lets you, meet other people, experience cool events that we have planned coming up, and there will be, coming up ways to give back to the community, as well as giving behind the scenes at MHS with special access events and tours. And if you would like, you can email youngfriends@mohistory.org, and I'll put that information in the chat later. If you want more information, you can email us there. So tonight's event is All That Glitters, which is a history of drag here in St. Louis. So we're doing this, in honor of Pride Month, as well as connecting to MHS's digital exhibit, Gateway to Pride. And we are really excited to have Maxie Glamour here tonight presenting to us. Maxie is a queer, multidisciplinary artist based here in St. Louis. Their work focuses on topics of intersectional queer liberation through psychedelic and fantasy imagery. They reached international success on the reality TV show Boulet Brothers Dragula. Since then, Maxie has used their platform to help advocate for queer social reform in the St. Louis area and beyond. So I want to welcome Maxie to the screen. There you are. Hello. Let you take it from here.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. It's such an honor to be here. I want to preface this saying that I don't know everything about the history of drag. A lot of this is from my findings online and some of my lived experiences. So yeah, let's dive deep. I'm really, really, really excited. Like I said, my name is Maxie Glamour and I'm ready. So I'm going to share my screen. I made this little presentation for you all. And we're going to present. Ta-da! So History on Tap, All That Glitters, a brief history of St. Louis and drag. And before we get into, the history of drag, let's kind of go over some topics and define what drag really is. So drag historically refers to wearing clothing more conventionally worn by the opposite sex. A lot of time this refers to women's clothes worn by men. And as we kind of are evolving as a society, gender boundaries have blurred. And over time, drag more commonly refers to a variety of gender expressions for stage. I personally like to think of drag as an acronym for Destroy Rules About Gender. Now, when we're looking at gender expansiveness and gender expression, a lot of drag queens are trans and a lot of drag kings as well. And trans itself is an umbrella term referring to any individual whose gender identity varies from the gender that they're assigned at birth. Not all people who do drag are trans and vice versa. However, many drag performers are trans because drag celebrates gender expression in all of its beautiful varieties. For me personally, drag really helped me come to terms with who I am and kind of deviating from the gender binary. That's another topic for another day. I don't know if many people knew, but drag used to be illegal. In the city of St. Louis, there's many, many, many cases. In 1958, a resident of East St. Louis, Samuel Hoover, was arrested and charged with masquerading. And he appeared in court wearing a dress. He pled not guilty and unfortunately was still assessed a fine of $300. Now, the law previously was called the masquerading law, and this law made it illegal in drag. This is kind of the legal jargon of the law itself. Oh, do we have a question already? I'm going to take that as a definitely maybe. We'll take questions a little bit later. So in 1864, the Offenses Against Morals and Decency law was passed in St. Louis. And so it said, whoever shall in the city appear in any public place in a state of nudity or in a dress not belonging to his or her sex, or in an indecent lewd dress, shall make an indecent exposure of his or her person, or be guilty of an indecent lewd act. Pretty much this is a long thing saying that you can't dress in other people's clothes, and the other people's gender's clothes, more so. And that law, unfortunately, was still in place in St. Louis until 80s. So in the 1980s, one of a very, very important drag queen in the city of St. Louis, Michelle McCausland, was arrested. And this is Michelle right here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but that's her. Actually, so that law stayed effective into the 80s when Michelle McCausland was arrested at the Uncle Marvin's Lounge on Washington. So when she was arrested, actually, the ACLU attested to the law. And over the next 2 years, they fought the state and the city, and they later turned over that law. Unfortunately, we lost Michelle McCausland last year due to the COVID epidemic. So I just wanted to let you see who she is in her heyday later in life. She was an icon, a glue to the queer community. And this is her and a famous performance at Pride. Go back to this. So that was Michelle McCausland at Pride. And as you could see, she was shaking hands and kissing people that were on these cars. And all those people that were on the cars, those are drag queens. And St. Louis has a huge, huge history of drag pageantry. So a lot of the drag in our city and a lot of southern states kind of goes back to the pageantry rules and systems. Some of the more famous pageants in the city of St. Louis that we have are Missouri Entertainer of the Year, also known as EOY, and that's been around since '91. Miss Gay St. Louis since '72, but the first winner was Candy James. And Miss Gay Missouri, 1974 with Julie Tomorrow. And Miss Fanny's Artist Ball, which is historically a black ball, has been around since 1987 with Alexis Principal winning. And I don't actually know any of these personally, except for Alexis Principal, who's still out there performing. I did actually find a blog by Charity Case, which I'll share with you later, which kind of shares her experiences throughout the St. Louis nightlife and drag scene. And it was really cool, really kind of living vicariously through her and her pageants that she won. Now, pageantry is a beautiful thing. And while it's true, I think that the drag in St. Louis has historically been heavily influenced by the pageantry system, with the many rules and guidelines for these competitions that had a heavy hand in the structure of the art form locally. Many of these pageants still kind of, unfortunately, hold up arbitrary rules that prohibit trans and or cis women from competing in their pageants. Many drag kings have not really actually been included into the drag community, even though drag kings have been around ever since the beginning of drag. And still today, it can be exponentially harder for drag performers that are assigned female at birth to find space in the community. And the city of St. Louis, the Pride pageant in the early 2000s finally allowed drag kings. And in the early 2000s, we had a lot of amazing drag kings kind of just show up, and they were always there, but they kind of started to get the highlight. And the guy in the middle, this is Ryder. He was the very first king of Pride, and this is Princeton Machiavelli. This is also another drag king group. All of them kind of got out there in the early 2000s, and it was really interesting seeing gender roles play out within drag. Unfortunately, and very obviously, we know that people within marginalized identities perpetuate some forms of oppression. So misogyny still, unfortunately, is prevalent. And the drag community, and in the early 2000s, there was a kind of a shift of drag itself. And that's actually where I got started. I started at a place called the Complex Nightclub, which was a wild, wild venue on Shoto and Grand, right behind the Long John Silver's. And it is one of many, many LGBT clubs that is no longer here. And that's me right there. I used to perform there, and it was a really, really great poppin' place that was always filled every night and had a huge patio with a volleyball pit. A lot of goths got to hang out there. A lot of club kids hung out there. They had hip hop and R&B nights on Sundays. It really was a place to kind of be. I know every single generation talks about that one place that holds nostalgia for them. A lot of people in my generation really look back to the Complex, and now we have Attitudes closing. Previous generations definitely looked at Faces and other venues. And Faces was a historic venue on the East Side, which pretty much anything went. One thing about queer culture is that before we were accepted in the mainstream society, as a lot of you know, we had to go to bars, and this was our safe haven. You know, really, it helped me find who I was. These are some of the pictures from Attitudes, kind of showing, you know, the fact that how drag now is more pertaining to like gender screwery and really interesting drag. This is my drag mother, and this is another mentor, Siren, who no longer lives in St. Louis, and another drag king named Sung Young Wang. And they kind of created this new counterculture of drag to combat the pageantry system at Attitudes. And it lived there for, I want to say, about a decade before that also eventually closed. Now, when we look at that, drag still is continuing to evolve, and we're thankfully in a space where we can be full-time drag performers, and that could be our job, and society's taking us seriously. And institutions like the History Museum invite us to talk about drag, or in the middle of the Drag Queen Storyline, Drag Queen Storytime at the public library happens, which created a huge uproar from some regressive-minded folk. And, you know, we have Tassandra Crush here, which is, she's a drag queen and also a trans icon, who pitched the first pitch a few years ago at Pride for the Cardinals. And these are some local drag queens at Rahab St. Louis who every week they are performing at. Now, when we look at queer culture and being assimilated into mainstream culture, we are noticing a lot of our bars are dying, and a lot of queer spaces and spaces that were safe spaces are kind of disappearing, and it's really unfortunate. So it's thankful that we have these institutions like the Cardinals and the St. Louis Public Library and the History Museum, and, you know, our continuous queer bars to have these spaces. And some of these are some resources that I recommend you checking out. This, let's click that. This is the blog of Charity Case, who was the first EOI of St. Louis, and she was really cool. I'll send you the link for this, and you can just really check out some of the pictures that she had. And, you know, this is all before we had MySpace or social media. So all of these were real photographs, and it's really interesting seeing how some of the techniques of drag are so indoctrinated into local drag, and you can still see people who do the makeup the same way and do the performances the same way. And it's really, really a tradition. A lot of drag historically in St. Louis has been focused on quote unquote female illusions. And these female illusions are to represent what an ideal woman figure would be, or to recreate the looks of famous women celebrities. And this is so amazing. I can get lost in that for days. Just pull that. And then this one was one of my favorite links that I found on my studies. This is a Explore Mapping LGBTQ St. Louis put on by Washington University. And it has this chart, which for some of you might help you move down memory lane or figure out like really where St. Louis has been in the past. So if you look at this, there's a legend here on the side, and I can tell you, if you look at all these green dots, zoom in, thank God for a touch screen. Some of them you have to get really close. That one's not working. Well, if you click on the dots, it will tell you the name of the venue. There we go. So this one is a crime dot, and it's the murder of a female impersonator, and the name was unidentified, and it was in 1980, and it kind of tells you all about that. Unfortunately, a lot of queer history is either erased, misreported, or more commonly ending in tragic death. So I recommend checking this out, and you can see, if you want to look at the bars, it's a little less sad, but you can see where all the bars have been in the city. And yeah, they kind of go around the central corridor, as one would assume, the more heavily populated areas of the city. And of course, we have a lot of the East Side ones. That is an amazing resource. Let me just close that one. And then another resource, which is a really great book that you can get by St. Louis's own Stephen Lewis Brawley from the St. Louis LGBT History Project. You can purchase this book. It talks great detail about gay and lesbian St. Louis life. I'm pretty sure it talks about trans people as well. Kind of are all lumped in there in the past, unfortunately. And a couple more references to show you. And this is on the St. Louis LGBT History Project. They have a whole section on drag, and there's some things that are missing from it, such as the St. Louis Pride Pageant and drag kings as well. But this goes into detail of all the famous drag bars that had drag shows over the years, particular drag pageants, and all the title holders of particular pageants that are drag queens. Some of these pageants do not allow drag kings, but others do. I know EOI does. And yeah, that is also an amazing resource. Definitely check out the St. Louis LGBT History Project. And you can get many, 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 many resources on queer culture in St. Louis. And then lastly, just for further reading, this is the article from St. Louis Public Radio about Michelle McCausland and her life, the end, and her overturning the masquerading laws in St. Louis. All right, and now I'm gonna stop sharing and say hello. Hi. Oh, okay, hi again.
Thank you for that. I would love to open the floor for questions if anyone has
I do.
Yes.
I'm Michael Datz. I'm a rabbi from Springfield, Illinois. And for what it's worth, I came out a few years ago, and was very much embraced by the congregation, which I'm very appreciative of. Anyway, first an observation and then a question. The observation is this: I'm not sure whether the animus historically towards people dressing in clothing of the opposite gender was necessarily an animus towards homosexuality or whatever. It may have been a little bit of that too, but some of it has a religious history. If you look in the Old Testament, or what Jews call the Hebrew Scripture, there's a prohibition on wearing clothing of the opposite gender. Now, some of that may have been, you can guess at what the reasons for that might have been. It might have had to do with notions of fashion and what's appropriate. It might have had to do with notions of modesty and modesty in dress. And I say, but not necessarily an animus towards homosexuality, although that certainly is to be found in the Old Testament. But I use as a reference point, when Katharine Hepburn first started appearing wearing trousers, when women generally started wearing clothing of the opposite gender, pantsuits and so forth, there was a huge outcry at the time. Katharine Hepburn was not a drag queen, but she certainly was a trailblazer in that regard. And even within Jewish tradition, sorry, I should put the video on. Sorry about that. Even within Jewish tradition, there were exceptions to the rule. The holiday of Purim, which is kind of a Jewish carnival time, kind of like Mardi Gras, allowed people to wear clothing of the opposite gender. It was all part of the party. And very often it was regarded as a source of comedy rather than a kind of deviation or perversion of things. I can't remember which comic it was, but was it Jack Benny or somebody, had a gig, had a shtick where he wore women's clothing and so forth, and that was perfectly acceptable. So it's just an observation that some of the animus might have a religious basis rather than necessarily an anti-gay basis, although sometimes the two are mixed up together, of course. My question, though, is this. Is there a distinction between transvestitism and drag? Is drag only drag when it's for purely entertainment purposes? And is it transvestitism when it's for some kind of sexual pleasure or something like that? Maxie, I'll give that back to you.
Yeah, I think as language is evolving, transvestite is kind of a word that we don't really use as often. When we look at gender identity and gender expression is how we dress. It doesn't always pertain to how we identify. A transvestite in particular can be someone, Eddie Lizard used to say that they were a transvestite as opposed to a drag queen. These terms and identities kind of are really pertinent to the person that uses them to refer to themselves. But as we are kind of moving closer to obliterating the separation between gender expression and gender identity, transvestitism kind of doesn't go, because when you look at the word transvestitism, it means literally to cross-wear or cross-dress. And so a lot of people just kind of don't really use that term as much anymore. But the main difference would be that historically transvestites would be someone who doesn't identify as a woman and dresses up for fun as opposed for entertainment, but there is some nuance within that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that was a great question. Thank you so much for all of that.
Sure.
Payne, you have a painful question, I hope.
Hopefully it won't be too painful. Nice to meet you. I am a huge fan of yours, and I'm also I'm a drag queen myself, and I am a master's student at Washington University, and I'm working on my thesis this fall, considering drag performance and labor. And I was curious. I know that you had mentioned working full time as a drag entertainer, and also in light of COVID and with at least 3 bars in St. Louis closing down during the pandemic. I'm curious, from your personal experience, what's it been like, I guess, working during these really precarious times?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can only speak from my personal experiences. I have definitely a privilege that I have like a different platform than other local performers. I know that a lot of performers have taken a break. There are several bars that won't book drag kings or book people that aren't a pageant, that don't fit the pageant mold. So all these people quit doing drag because they don't have any outlets for it. Me personally, I'm very thankful that I get to work with institutions like the History Museum, the St. Louis Art Museum, and CAM and Pulitzer to really bring art and drag to a different crowd. But when it comes to like community focused, like queer art for queer people, I think that a lot of drag queens are suffering. There are, as we know, like there's a lot of tokens in drag, and once you have one token, you don't really need any more. So a lot of Black drag queens are out of the mix. A lot of trans drag queens out of the mix, drag kings, etc. I know that a lot of people are quitting drag just to find something more stable. One thing about the employment of drag itself is that, our booking is pertinent to like our social relevance. And so if we are no longer socially relevant, we are no longer booked. And that comes to like age or like different sense of fashion that society gets. And you can see older drag queens who will still do 8 shows a day because they have to make ends meet, and these shows that will book them don't pay them properly, and they don't have health insurance. And so you'll see a lot of drag queens die at a young age, or they won't be able to walk anymore because they can't afford to get that knee replacement. And so locally, we've been trying to unionize drag queens and drag performers, but it's a different working field, and there's not a lot of support behind it.
Well, and it's also very expensive, I understand. There's a video, I'm sure you're acquainted with it. It's some famous drag queen who's telling the audience, be sure to tip these girls because it cost a lot of money to look this cheap, is the way the video goes. And it's really very funny, but it's a very expensive hobby or diversion, or however you want to look at it. It's expensive.
Yeah, that's a famous line by Dolly Parton that a lot of drag queens repeat, because Dolly Parton's pretty much a drag queen when you look at it.
Maxie, are there any organizations that support the drag artists that need support, like that are like social support groups in St. Louis that people can donate to? Or
I think that I don't know if there are any organizations that specifically help drag queens, but I know that there are organizations that specifically help trans people. I know that St. Louis Metro Umbrella Group really helped all people under the trans umbrella, and some people do find that drag itself is under the trans umbrella. It really depends on how you identify. I would say that they're a pretty great one. There really aren't a lot of organizations. I have an organization called Court, which is focused on intersectional queer liberation and helping promote financial stability of artists. You can donate to us, but I think MTOG will probably be the best one. Tower Grove Pride definitely makes sure that they pay all their performers. That's one huge thing is performers don't get paid very well, and they'll get like, even after like I have like a couple of accolades, and I still get asked to do shows like 3 numbers for $25. And thankfully I can say no. That's kind of like wage theft, but a lot of people don't have a lot of opportunities and need that exposure. So a lot of times they'll take that. And so we need more. So if you have the resources and you have the capacity to start an organization to help drag queens and drag performers, we need you.
Any more questions out there?
Or comments. I would love to see, like, I'm hoping that there's a lot of queer people in here. I would love to see like where your first, not gay experience, because that could be a lot of different things. But your first gay bar was, like your first queer bar, or your first place where you're like, oh, I'm here and I'm queer and this place is for me. So if any of you like want to type that in the comments, I would love to see that, just to kind of get like a reach. Knowing like
It's yours. While they're typing, what's yours?
my favorite experience, it'd have to be the complex. I think that I was young, I was naive and impressionable, and it was really a space where I think that St. Louis has been hurting since the complex shut down. Even JJ's like was a bigger place, but it still didn't have like the racial diversity and the nights, or you know, that acceptance that complex has. Oh, we've got someone. Uncle Elizabeth in the back door in Bloomington, Indiana. Since moving to St. Louis, my only experience has been at rehab.
Can you talk about how your particular performance has evolved? From like that photo that you showed, you know, in a dress that's different than what you're wearing and doing now. Like, how has it evolved over time?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, you know, with RuPaul's Drag Race coming, drag got to be in more of the limelight and more, you know, I'm doing a show for Facebook, and I'm doing a show for Xbox in the next week. And so with that, there's a lot of competition and a lot of people are pushing each other further. And so I know that locally, a lot of drag has kind of reflected what people see on TV. And that can be, it's very ambivalent, because I think that some of the personas on TV get repeated. Me personally, I think I've definitely had to step up my game, because I'm like, oh, wow, there's all this drag up there. I have to compete not only with the pageant queens that are doing the same thing, but like these people that are in New York and LA. And I've definitely, drag really has helped me come to terms with my identity, who I am as Maxi. Nobody really knows me outside of Maxi Glamour. Oh my gosh, my first experience was in Chicago at Berlin. I love Berlin. That's a great bar in Chicago. The stage is about this big, but it's great. And your first experience in St. Louis would be the complex. Cool. And Angie said, hi Maxi, I'm a hair older. I miss Fallout, Complex, Magnolias, and Faces. I've heard of the legendary Faces with a dark room in the basement and anything goes. I think a lot of queer culture was, you know, gay bars were where you got to be a drag queen, where you got to hook up with someone, because like outside of gay bars, you couldn't really be gay. So these dark rooms were just kind of like a way to bump into someone in the night and not have to worry about being outed during the day. Ah, good old Faces, a place I miss that I've never been to. Of course, you weren't allowed downstairs. Yeah, Angie, I think that that's really reflective of the misogyny within the queer community, and I'm sorry that you had experienced that. Hopefully, as we move forward, that we can have more accepting kinky spaces. Any more questions or comments? I feel like there's like a bucket of knowledge out there that I feel like a lot of you have that I also want to know. I think, Bill, where was your first gay experience? I'm looking at you in that mustache, and I'm like, you have to have a couple of experiences.
Well, I was currently writing, actually. But my first gay bar was in Peoria, Illinois, 35 or more years ago, when I went to, and I'll take this off. I went with a friend who lived there to this gay bar, and I was basically in the closet at that time. And it was a whole lot of dancing and everything else. And that was sort of put me off it for a while because it was too much. But the first bar in St. Louis that I went to that had drag stuff was about 20 years ago, and that was Magnolias. I'd also like to ask you, is Gray Fox still around? I know I live near there, and I drove by there, and I can't tell if they've closed down because of the pandemic, or if I thought maybe you know.
Yeah, the Gray Fox is still open.
Okay.
Most nights of the week. Sunday night is Candy Principal's show, and it's an all black, mostly trans drag review. It is a hoot. It's always packed. And then Jade Sinclair is there Friday and Saturday. There's not a lot of drag kings that get booked there or any gender expansive performers, but it does hold the staple of like the history of drag very well.
I'd also like to, this may be a little, maybe I shouldn't say this online, but I will.
Let's hear it.
A friend of mine, well, he was more than a friend. He was a former lover in the 90s. Was very into had a big beard, but he also dressed full out, and he called that gender fuck. And I'd like to see what you say about that.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people don't care about gender roles, and I think that they want to obliterate them. And so the term gender fuck is in, I think, Webster's lexicon, just kind of like a conglomeration of gender kind of on your own rules. And when I started doing drag in the 2000s, that was like a huge style that a lot of people did. I think it kind of combated the arbitrary rules of like, this is what drag has to be. You have to shape your beard, you have to like wear pads, you can't have body hair. And you know, as we're looking and understanding gender itself, a lot of people are like, well, I'm trans and I have hair, this is natural, so shouldn't I express my gender freely? And I think gender fuck drag is beautiful and is well deserved, and unfortunately we're still fighting to have their equal place in the drag community. Thank you for that question.
All right, thank you.
Then we have one more. This is the first queer bar I went to, and the only one I've been to is a League of Her Own in Washington, D.C. Oh, well, that means you have to go to more.
It's a great name for a bar.
Yes, we still need more woman-owned spaces in the queer scene. We lost the historic Novaks in St. Louis, which was a very wonderful lesbian place, and Attitudes as well. I think the only space that has drag shows that's woman-owned regularly is the Crack Fox downtown, and that's my favorite place right now. Do we have any more questions or comments or anything that anyone wants to share?
I was wondering if you dress like a guy during the day. I know that's really out of there. I'm 70 and I came out in the 1970s.
Yeah, so I'm a non-binary trans person and I'm very gender fluid. And so even when I wear like a shirt or like pants, I don't really quote unquote call it like a guy, kind of more on the lines of like Katharine Hepburn, something like that. I do dress differently every day. Yeah, I don't know if does that answer your question well?
Sure it does.
Yeah, I don't always wear
Gender
this hat.
fluid, I didn't even know what that was. So at least you opened my mind to that.
Yeah,
That's great.
that's what I'm here for.
And you're very, very pretty.
All makeup, but I appreciate you.
Have you watched the series on Netflix, Big Sky?
What's that?
There's a series on Netflix called Big Sky. I don't know if you've watched it.
I have not seen that.
It's all about some sex trade in Montana and so forth. It's in its second. It's a creepy show in some ways, but there's a character in there. I didn't know if you'd seen it and whether you thought it was a sensitive portrayal. He, she, I mean, I don't know whether the character is in the process of transitioning or is a drag queen. Or anybody here on the Zoom know what I'm talking about?
No.
Okay, well, it's a wonderful show. I mean, as I say, it's a creepy show, but it's a wonderful show. But
Yeah.
there's a main character, probably one of the only shows on TV where a male, female, whatever, is a main character and very sensitively done, I would think. I in my estimation, I don't know if you've seen it.
No, I haven't. You know,
she looks a lot like you, I got to tell you.
Must be ugly.
No, by no means.
I just want to give you a little bit, all of you, like a little bit of terminology for when you don't know a particular person's gender, as opposed to saying like he or she. I think sometimes they could work definitely as a good filler, just so it's not presumptuous at times, because I think he, she has been a term used as a pejorative towards trans people. And as we're like looking from a sociolinguistic perspective, we're trying to get out of being that, but yeah, we all have room.
Unless you're a grammar stodge like I am, and therefore the idea of using a plural pronoun for a singular person would be an abomination.
Not according to Webster Dictionary or most linguistics, but I can see that argument being presented often. Wonderful. Any more questions?
Thank you for your time and your thoughtful presentation.
Yes, thank you so much for being here.
And maybe I'll see you. What's the place in St. Louis? Oh God, there's so much bric-a-brac on the walls all over the place. Do you know which bar I'm talking about? I can't hear you, Bill. You're on mute. Bill, you're on mute.
I can't
There you
think of it. But I know where it is. It's on, but I can't think of the name.
Yeah.
All right.
All I know is that if Maxie walked in, nobody would notice her. There is so much crap on the walls there.
It's got a French name. Starts
think
with a B.
Yeah. You don't get out much, do you?
I'm thinking it's Bastille. I think
It
That's
is
it,
Bastille.
Bastille. That's
Yeah.
it. That's it.
Yeah, I don't actually go there.
Well, and if you have asthma or any other kinds of issues, don't go there because that stuff probably hasn't been dusted in 20 years.
Neither have I.
Well, I think
Thank
that's a
you.
great spot to wrap the evening. If there's another question in the chat, if someone wants to throw that in there. But Maxie, thank you so much for chatting with us tonight.
Yes, thank you so much. Also, I'm having an album release party July 3rd, and I'll be in drag with a full band. So if you want to see some punk rock psychedelic drag, it's at the Crack Fox July 3rd.
Thank you.
And I can highly recommend you as an Instagram or Facebook follow, like one of my favorites. So anyone that doesn't follow Maxie, like do it right now. So well, thank you everybody for being here. Thanks for coming to our Young Friends event. We should have some new events coming up, in the fall in August, and like I said, a Ghost Buildings walking tour in October that I'm looking forward to because I'm doing it. I'm Amanda Clark, and I'm the Community Tours Manager at the Missouri Historical Society. And we have the email in the chat for, I think it's the Young Friends at mohistory.org if you want to email us about that. And then Maxie, is there any, other than through social media, is that how people should contact you if they have questions?
Yeah, contact me on social media. I have maxieglamour.com if you want to check out my art, anything I'm working on. Yeah, do that.
Excellent. And I invite everybody to our online exhibit about Gateway to Pride as well at MHS. All right. Thank you everyone for coming, and hope you all have a lovely evening.
Thank you too.
Mhm.